Hi, this is Sunil Bhartia, and welcome to TFiR Insights. If you look today, many companies have data which is stored in data lake in their on-premise environment, and most of the time it's not utilized to its even if it is utilized to the full extent, you still need more places to go there, especially when we talk about today's world. We live in a multi-cloud world. We use different public clouds, and then we also use hybrid cloud where we bring our own data center so that we can take advantages of each. But the problem is that data lake is not something that you can quickly move from one place to other place. You call it lake for for a reason. In many cases, what happens is that it becomes really challenging task when companies do want to kind of manage data across public cloud or on-prem. To discuss this problem and many other aspects of data lake, today we have with us Haoyuan Lee, founder and CEO of Alluxio. First of all, HY, thanks for being on the show, and please correct me if I said your name wrong.
It's correct. My Chinese name is Haoyuan. My English name is HY, my initials. Pleasure to be here.
Do you agree with this assessment that it's really a big challenge to move data, because you're talking about massive amount of data? So talk about this problem a bit.
Yeah, definitely. So this is particularly a challenge for a large enterprise companies, for the data-driven companies. They already have tremendous amount of data in their enterprise environment. And all these companies, they already have invested a lot of capital into the on-premise environment and stored the data there in the past. So then the challenge are twofold. One challenge is that, like say, they want to generate value from those data. To generate value from the data, they need to somehow leverage the data in the most effective manner. And in many cases, that means they want to leverage the advanced tools in the cloud, new tools in the cloud. On the other case, it means they want to leverage elastic compute resource in the cloud. But then, as you mentioned, the challenge is that they already have this data on premise, and it's a data lake. It's very challenging to, on one side, really moving those data to the public cloud in the easy way. And on the other side, because many of these enterprise companies, they see as a strategic to them. So they purposely keep the data on premise in their own data center, in their own environment, to keep the data safe and to keep their strategic asset completely under their control. So then, as you can imagine, it becomes very challenging for these companies to leverage elastic compute resource in the cloud, as well as to leverage the new compute tools and resources, compute applications in the cloud, particularly data-driven applications, machine learning, AI, and advanced analytics.
I just want to go beyond just the on-prem and public cloud. Beyond the hybrid cloud story, I also want to talk about the multi-cloud story, because, as you mentioned, we have three major players. Azure is there, GCP is there, and AWS is there. And in some cases, they all have kind of unique tools for that specific problem. Somebody is excellent at elasticity, somebody is great at machine learning, so that you can leverage all of that. At the same time, there are a lot of assets, either it's IP or trade secret, that you do not want to leave your data center ever. So can you just you did touch upon that, but I just want to talk about how companies should take advantage of all these different words while also retaining control and influence where they need to.
Definitely, that's a very typical enterprise journey as well for the modernization of their IT environment or data environment. So what we saw is that typically for this huge enterprise, sometimes they move to the hybrid cloud as the first step, and immediately after that, they are going to start to move into the multi-cloud environment. So the challenge is similar, which is they either have the data on premise or have the data in one public cloud already, and then they want to leverage another public cloud. And as we know, the data has gravity. How can we solve that issue to enable efficient data access from computing in one cloud and data in the other cloud? How do you handle that? How do you solve that challenge of the networking challenge, speed challenge, etc. Security challenge. That's a big issue for these enterprise companies to adopt the multi-cloud architecture. And almost every single Fortune 500 companies we talk to, and they already in some shape or form in the multi-cloud already environments. Is that it's just that how much it is in the multi-cloud environment and how flexible their architecture it is today to enable or to solve those challenge is very troublesome.
And what are some of the solutions that are out there, in context of a story like data abstraction is one that can help these companies to solve this problem?
So that's a great question, and I'm sure all people are trying to solve this challenge one way or the other. Traditionally, the industry has been trying to solve this challenge by, say, migrating the whole data lake to one place to another place, and by utilizing another storage. And the history has shown us that it's never succeeded. And every 5 to 10 years, there will be technology came out, claimed to be the new data lake. Excuse me. And then this enterprise will start to migrate. It's an endless process. And the other approach we see which is very promising, is called a data orchestration approach, which means you use a software as your data orchestration platform. And this data orchestration platform essentially can orchestrate your data for these data-driven applications to consume in a very efficient and effective way, no matter what data application they are, what data applications they are, or which environment they run in. For example, it could be a analytical application in one cloud, could be machine learning in another cloud, could be deep learning on premise. It doesn't matter. So this data orchestration platform should enable this multi-cloud or hybrid cloud environment. And from the user perspective, it should feel like they are still talking to a local storage or the local file system object store, etc. And that type of experience that we feel is the right direction should be the solution moving forward. And in the field, we have seen the success of this type of approach to enable this hybrid cloud environment very easily, as well as this multi-cloud environment as well successfully. We have seen these proven points, particularly some of the large enterprise. That's the approach we see can solve this problem and can have already had success in these different type of environments.
And what are the open source solutions available for data orchestration? Of course, we know the answers, but
Yeah. So thanks for asking. So clearly we Alluxio, we believe in this approach, and we started the open source project, also called Alluxio, years ago from UC Berkeley AMP and then we started a company, founded the company, commercialized it, and as well as continuously heavily invest in this open source community and have more users and partners in this as well. So that's this Alluxio open source community. We have effectively implemented a version of the data orchestration platform, and we have seen hundreds of thousands of users already using this approach, solving their problems, like we mentioned, hybrid cloud and multi-cloud. And just I think last week there's a Google webinar between Alluxio and Google Compute Platform, GCP, Google Cloud, and to promote, to evangelize, advocate how to enable hybrid cloud analytics using this type of data orchestration software and architecture.
Right. If you look at open source, Alluxio does a lot of open source, and you mentioned Berkeley, a lot of, open source data driven, Spark and all of project came out of there. So, uh, but then the problem with open source is that it's more or less like day one, you can get the code from the repository, you can install it. What about day two? What about, you may need a lot of features, specifically for your environment. What about support? What about, management? What about upgradability? So there are so many things. So talk a bit about the difference between building versus buying. Of course, there are a lot of advantages there of building yourself when you have internal resources, when you have in-house team of engineers. But you do need a lot of, and why should your engineer waste resources on plumbing and many things when they should be investing their time in building things that add business value? Basically, what I want to understand is this build versus buy, using open source versus going with an enterprise solution.
So, like typically what we see is that there are different type of companies in the world, and it's different type of company based on, as you mentioned, their expertise, their strategic advantage, focus, and the severity or the seriousness of their applications, and all these factors together, they decide whether they want to go with a pure open source solution or a enterprise version of the open source solution. We have seen many cases in either way. So typically for a company, a large enterprise, they typically would prefer to go towards the enterprise. Could be very likely open source based enterprise solution. And actually, as a Alluxio company, we do provide the enterprise edition on top of our community open source edition as well, providing some enterprise security features, etc. And with enterprise level support for these banks, for these telecommunication companies, very clearly when they run your software in production, and there are lots of the value at stake. And if your software goes down, and it means like some business will be impacted, and it's very impactful from that perspective. And in this case, typically they prefer a vendor behind the enterprise solution to support them, to make sure their business will go very smoothly and reduce the downtime to the minimum. And on the other side, there are other type of companies, like they are probably small companies, or maybe like internet companies. Sometimes they may prefer to leverage a pure open source solution, so that on one side, yes, they have the software engineer resource and they can keep the cost low, and on the other side, and they also can have the flexibility of participating in the open source community and help the community together further develop this software, as well as evangelize the software to the broader community.
We don't talk about this often, but while it is true that by using open source, you also ensure that there is no vendor lock-in, because you can move. I mean, you are using upstream project versus the fact is that even if you are using an open source project, there is a possibility of building a vendor lock-in. I don't want to name anybody, but there is a possibility to create. But yes, while there are a lot of advantages, there are some downsides also of just using the upstream open source. Unless and until you are, as you mentioned, a lot of examples. Let me, if you're a big company like, let's say, like Google or Facebook, you are a tech company yourself. But not every company is tech company. Bang. I mean, today's world, everybody is leveraging cloud and open source, but they are not tech company. They do have teams. So what are some of the downsides of using? I mean, we don't feel comfortable talking about it, but I still want to talk about it, where that these are the downsides of using pure open source upstream. That's why it does make sense to go with the enterprise ready solution.
We typically see for the traditional enterprise companies, like financial service companies, like telecommunication, pharmaceutical, etc., biology, media companies, they typically will go with the enterprise version of the open source, and on one side they get the benefit of the reduced vendor lock-in. So in the worst case, they can still leverage the open source upstream project and provide them some optionality there. But on the other side, they also get the benefit of their vendor supporting the software. guarantee or with the capability to make sure their operation of the software or their operation of the platform is smooth, stable, and provides value continuously to their business. And that's what we're seeing. And we actually we see this is a trend in the industry, and more and more software, different type of software are being built through the open source methodology and in an open source way. Even though there are so many nuances how to build open source software and how to build an open source community, etc. But the big trend is going towards open source, more collaboration and more contribution, more ideas from different places. That's what we're seeing. So we see that's a trend. I don't see that trend is being changed in any way. And we see more and more companies are embracing this trend. And I don't see much of a downside of this trend either.
How much role does SLA and, depending on the industry, 4 nines play, where high availability is critical? You cannot, afford any downtime whatsoever.
So in many cases, lots of these companies, they started from these small projects in their enterprise environment, try to familiarize with the software, and then try to solve the issue for them. And then after getting familiar with it, and they will enlarge the usage and to make it more and more critical. So what we're seeing is that there are definitely in many cases, depends on the time, it became very critical to these companies. I'll give you some examples. So for example, from the e-commerce perspective, some of our users, they run us in a way that there are shopping holidays. And for the shopping holidays, they run the platform, run the software, and their algorithm will compute, train a model so that they can recommend better, more suitable products to their customers. And if the platform is down, and the downside will become very clear, which is they get less revenue because the model is out of date. That's one example. The other example, there's a telecommunication company, and they use this type of platform to compute the billing for all their subscribers, and by the end of every month, and that compute has to be done by a particular date. And if that's done, and if it's come back in an hour or so, maybe fine. But if it's done for a period of time, essentially it's become a very big accident for this type of company because they cannot provide the bills to their customers. It's very direct business impact. And the other example is a financial service company. It's a huge bank. So they have hundreds of people every day running their analytics, queries, analysis on top of this type of platform. And when this platform is down for any minute during the day, it's impacting several hundred people right away. And of course, the value of that is hard to be measured. And that's another example. There's so different type of degrees examples, but in many cases, when they start to use this in a very critical way, as long as the system is down, they will get the business impact right away, more or less. Some is less revenue, some is more cost, some is even the fine from the government.
One thing that I think is it works in favor of open source, that even if you're getting an open source enterprise solution, is that unlike pure proprietary vendor, if the push comes to shove, you can still go in there and patch it yourself. I mean, yeah, you would not want to, but you do have the whole, you can run a soft fork within your organization. So you can do things internally. You are not totally dependent on the vendor, while you can because of all those SLAs, but that gives you an extra edge.
That's correct. That's definitely correct. That's a one advantage of leveraging a software based on open source solution. So you got certain flexibility or optionality, like you mentioned.
We are going through this crisis right now, COVID-19. There are a lot of other problems also that's going on, but the big one was a few days ago, COVID-19. The most important thing with COVID-19 is that it is going to change the way we look at our infrastructure, the way we build it. And a lot of, people are moving to cloud. And there actually the interesting thing is that depending on who you talk to, a lot of people are saying that no, companies are actually moving towards their data center. They want to have a mix of a data center, they want a mix of cloud, which means hybrid cloud is going to become really, really critical. What is your perspective on that? What role is hybrid cloud going to play in this post COVID-19 world, and why? And how you, or not especially you, Alexio, but in general, the ecosystem is going to help them?
Definitely. So, with the COVID-19, for these companies, a lot of companies want more agility. It's harder for them to provision their own on-premise environment. So there's a very clear advantage of moving the workloads to the cloud. And the first challenge when they trying to move their workloads to the cloud is the data gravity, and how to move the data to the cloud completely, and which will take a lot of planning, a lot of process, lots of consideration to make that type of a big decision. So hybrid cloud is a very intuitive way in this case to come in to help these enterprise companies to use the cloud and leverage the cloud agility and scalability and advanced tools right away, in the sense of the data is still on premise, but they compute in the cloud environment. And of course, in this architecture, the very first challenge they are going to face is a performance challenge of the data locality. Without the locality, compute data on premise and compute in the cloud just takes a long time for any compute for any data-driven applications. And we see that with the data orchestration system, with the caching functionality, and the algorithm and policies of moving the data back and forth between the cloud and on-premise clearly can solve this issue. And we have seen this company can save up to 10 times of the overall cost perspective to get the same thing done. That's 10 times cost perspective. That's pretty significant for these companies. And at the same time, increase their work efficiency because they got better tool and they got more compute resource, scalable compute resource in the cloud. And we have seen examples that some of our customers that they use this hybrid cloud architecture essentially enable 10 times, actually save 10 times cost to get the same work done, but at the same time improve the work efficiency by 4 times. The same person previously to finish a model would take a year. Now it's only take 3 months. That's very tremendous. And that's the benefit we're seeing, how this company are moving, how this company and why these companies are moving to the hybrid cloud architecture.
Awesome. Thank you, HY, taking time out and talking to me today. And as I said earlier, I love to talk to you again because the landscape is changing, challenges are changing. So, but thank you for your time, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. And likewise, I'd like to come back again and enjoy the conversation.